Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling something really mind-bending, how we, perceive reality.
Right.
Forget the idea that your senses are just like passively recording everything out there.
Mm-hmm.
We're digging into this compelling idea, based on some really insightful sources, that what you experience, your reality, is actually something your brain builds actively.
Exactly. And for this deep dive, we've been looking at these excerpts from a chapter that really forces you to question those basic assumptions.
Yeah.
It cleverly blends the science, the neuroscience of perception with some deeper philosophical questions. And they all seem to point towards this active construction idea.
Right. So our mission here really is to get a handle on how our brains pull this off, this construction of reality. We want to explore that process and maybe more importantly, think about what it implies about, the world itself.
Yeah.
And how we experience it.
It's a big topic.
It is. Have you ever just stopped and thought, how do my senses actually work? Is what I see, what I hear objectively there, or is something else going on? Okay, let's get into it.
Well, the source material kicks off by really challenging that common sense view.
The recording idea.
Exactly. That we just faithfully record what's out there. And then it drops this line, which I have to say really landed with me.
Yeah.
You think you are simply recording what is out there. Amusing, truly.
Yeah, amusing. That definitely makes you pause, doesn't it?
It does.
It sort of sets the scene perfectly. Like, okay, maybe things aren't as simple as they seem, and this idea of active construction is key.
Definitely. It's not passive perception at all.
Our brains are busy.
Incredibly busy. Think about all the raw data hitting you constantly. Light waves, sound vibrations, pressure on your skin, chemicals in the air.
Just noise, almost.
In its raw form, yes. It's not the rich, coherent world you experience. That comes later. Your brain takes that, chaos, frankly, and actively interprets it, organizes it, essentially builds a picture.
So the light hitting my eye isn't red, my brain makes it red.
Precisely. The light is just electromagnetic radiation of a certain wavelength. Your visual cortex does the work of interpreting that signal as the color red, as shapes, as movement. It's an interpretation.
And it's not just interpreting the raw data in isolation, right? The sources emphasize that other things shape this construction.
Oh, absolutely. It's not happening in a vacuum.
Yeah.
What you bring to the table matters hugely.
Like what?
Well, your past experiences are constantly being referenced.
Yeah.
Your expectations, what you think you're going to see or hear, can literally shape the perception. Even your cultural background plays a role, your emotional state right now. And underlying all of it is our basic biological programming. Evolution shaping us to perceive things useful for survival.
Which brings us to that analogy in the source.
Yeah.
The universe as this huge signal.
Yeah, I love that analogy. The universe is this infinite, multidimensional signal, like a cosmic broadcast on countless frequencies.
Wow.
And our senses, they're just limited antenna. They can only tune into a tiny, tiny fraction of that whole broadcast.
Makes you feel a bit limited. What are we missing?
Exactly. And then the brain steps in. The source calls it a busy, very opinionated radio receiver, editor, and projectionist.
Opinionated. I like that.
Yeah.
Because it fills in gaps, right?
It does, often based on what it expects, like filling in the blind spot in your vision. You don't notice the gap because the brain papers over it.
And it filters things out, too. A lot, apparently.
Enormous amount. This leads to the idea of the filtering nature of consciousness, or the brain as a filter for what the source calls universal consciousness.
Universal consciousness. Okay, what do they mean by that, generally?
It generally points to this idea of a bigger, non-local, maybe interconnected field of awareness. The concept here is that our individual brains act as filters, or perhaps receivers, tuning into and localizing a slice of that broader consciousness.
So we don't get the raw, unfiltered reality.
No, we get the processed version, the edited highlights, if you like.
And this editing, this filtering, it's not malicious, it's practical. For survival.
That's the idea. It helps us focus on what matters for, finding food, avoiding danger, navigating social stuff. The solid, separate, predictable things.
Okay.
So the source suggests that maybe the constant change, the underlying unity of things, maybe even subtle energies.
Yeah.
A lot of that gets filtered out. It's noise from a purely survival perspective.
We need functional simplicity.
Right.
Okay, this is where it gets really fascinating for me. Walter Russell.
Ah, yes, the coma-like state.
The source brings him up and asks this question. Could his altered state, being in that state, have somehow bypassed the usual filters?
It's a profound question. We've just talked about the brain filtering reality for practical reasons.
Right.
But what if those filters change or weaken? Russell's case is presented as kind of, well, thought experiment on that.
Could his consciousness, maybe less constrained by the usual brain activity, have tuned into
More.
a broader band of that cosmic signal we talked about?
That's exactly what the source speculates. Could he have been perceiving a more fundamental layer of reality, something our everyday senses just don't register?
And that leads directly to the source asking that really big question. If your perceived reality is an active construction, a filtered simulation built by your brain, what is the true reality you're missing? What lies beyond the limits of your biological receiver?
Yeah, that hits hard. It really forces you to confront the limits of your own experience.
Mm-hmm.
And it connects to that fundamental debate about consciousness itself.
Right. Is consciousness just a product of brain chemistry, an emergent thing, maybe even an illusion like some argue?
Is consciousness primary? Is it the fundamental reality and our brains are more like receivers or filters that tune it, localize it, make it personal?
Which connects back to Russell.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If consciousness is fundamental, then maybe his experience wasn't just a brain malfunction or hallucination. Maybe it was a glimpse of the source, unfiltered.
Wow. Okay, that's a lot to take in. But it's powerful, isn't it? Just realizing that our perception is filtered, that it's a version, not the version.
It really is. It opens up possibilities, doesn't it? Maybe there are other ways to perceive, other frequencies available.
Yeah. And Zoran's quote you mentioned.
Yeah, yes. From the source, you see the world through a keyhole forged by survival and call it the universe. The keyhole is your brain, and the universe is vast beyond its frame.
That sums it up perfectly. The keyhole is the brain.
Wow.
It's very evocative.
So to make this a bit more hands-on for people listening, the source has this exercise, the dragon trial.
Yes, it's a practical way to explore this. It asks you to take a familiar object, something you see every day,
Okay.
and then really pay attention to the process of seeing it. Think about the light bouncing off it, hitting your eyes, the signals going to your brain.
The whole chain reaction.
Right. The complex brain activity that results in the image you perceive.
No.
And then it asks you to reflect. How might your expectations, your knowledge about that object be coloring what you see? So really becoming aware of the construction process as it happened.
Exactly. And the final step is to notice. Does this awareness change how you feel about the object? Does it feel less solid, less objectively out there?
Interesting. It forces you to confront that subjective layer. So if our brains are doing all this constructing and filtering, does that mean two people looking at the exact same thing might actually be having different experiences?
Well, yes. In subtle ways, and then sometimes maybe not so subtle ways, there's common ground, of course, shared sensory input, similar biology.
Mm-hmm.
But the unique filter of your past experiences, your expectations, your current mood, that inevitably shapes your specific perception. So yeah, fundamentally different interpretations of the same event are possible, even likely.
So the big takeaway then, it's not a recording.
Definitely not. Our reality, what we experience, is an active construction,
Yep.
a filtered version.
And there might be a much larger, more interconnected reality that we're usually screened off from.
That's the implication, yes.
Yeah.
Which leaves us with a final thought, really. If our brains are such powerful filters, what else might be out there? What other kinds of realities or experiences might exist just beyond the limits of our normal senses and interpretations?
That's something to really chew on.
It is. How might knowing this, feeling this constructed nature of your reality, change how you interact with the world, how you experience your own thoughts and feelings?
Lots to think about.